Just so that you know, I have absolutely nothing to do with the music today, so please thank Olga and thank Irita and thank Irita's husband. That was beautiful. All right, talking about race in an interracial setting is never easy. There's guilt and finger pointing. At the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County in Port Charlotte, Florida, we began a dialogue by conducting a service similar to this. We found that when the congregation heard personal stories about race from the point of view of friends and fellow congregants, the conversations that followed didn't seem to carry the baggage usually associated with such conversations. Excuse me. It is our hope today that this service will open a clear line of communication and bonding at Albany UU. And as my welcome story, I have Irita London's story. She says, Anne-Marie Haber gave me the gift of a free ticket to Albany Symphony's season finale, Convergence, a spoken word concerto for orchestra, words by Mark Bamuthi Joseph. This concerto was performed at Impact Concert Hall in Troy. Convergence touched me deeply and my struggle to forgive America for slavery, forgive how slavery impacted my life as a fetus, child, adult, and now as a senior. Slavery impacted my parents. Slavery has impacted my son. Slavery has caused post-traumatic slave syndrome for those who are descendants of slaves. The movement of the concerto named Forgiveness expresses how I feel as a human being who was born Black in America and a descendant of slaves. This excerpt from this outstanding concerto speaks to my soul. The cycle of sorry and the flattened muscle of forgiveness, the forgotten democracy and the country we leave our children, the transgression transpired in weakness, the foul play without witness. Forgive us if we won't forget. If I win my struggle to forgive, I just might be free. Yet I am encoded to attach to moral encumbrance. It feels foreign to me. It feels foreign to be free of hurt, to be free, like a congregation struck by a flash of spirit in church. Okay, as a call to community, I'm going to read the one anonymous essay that was submitted for today's sermon. I'm returning to the question at hand over and over. How does the race and/or ethnicity of others intersect with my life? I believe I'm returning to it again and again because it's a tiny piece in a larger mosaic of questions. The larger whole mosaic begs, pleads, to know, where do I belong? Do I belong with people sharing the same skin color? Do I belong with people who are my age? Do I belong with people who share my ethnicity? Do I belong with people who share my political beliefs? Do I belong with people with whom I share a profession? Do I belong with people who have an encompassing appreciation for nature? Do I belong with people who like to read the same books? Do I belong with people who enjoy the same kind of music? Where do I belong? As a UU, I take our 8 principles very seriously. I figure that with those tenets in common, we should be able to enjoy each other in beloved community, no matter our skin color, age, ethnicity, political belief, profession, feelings about nature, reading preferences, taste in music. However, I'm afraid that this is often not the case. I have friends and acquaintances at Albany UU who are very different from me in all of the aforementioned ways. I feel a spiritual authenticity and warmth when I am with them. Race and or ethnicity get in the way with others. Unfortunately, it can be a single bad experience that affects us profoundly. When I experience white supremacist words or behaviors, I find myself shriveling, shrinking away from the person who has the bad behavior, adding another thin layer to my armor. Psychic distance helps shield me from the person who behaves that way. Psychic distance cuts that person off from all I have to offer in beloved community. It's really, this is not the first time on the pulpit speaking, but I have to be honest with you, this is the first time I've actually been nervous. I'd like to begin by paraphrasing a quote from Booker T. Washington. It is charity and wisdom to keep in mind the schooling and prejudice against African Americans, which European Americans are called upon to cover. Beginning in 1619, where whites were taught Africans were not human beings but property. As early as 1706, whites were being taught that Native Americans were savages to be herded and slaughtered. Then add at least 100 years of segregation where whites were treated people of color or inferior, uneducable, and lazy. Then add 60 more years of redlining, job discrimination where whites were told that people of color were criminals, prone to substance abuse, having babies and not caring for them. Even those of us who know these things are not true have had some of these ideas seep into our subconsciousness. When I adopted my 2 African American children, I assumed their mother had been an unwed teenager on welfare, perhaps on drugs. Turns out she was a grown woman with a job and private insurance. There is negative racism, which I think we all understand. But from where I stand in this equation, I can tell you there is also positive prejudice as well. For example, I have been told countless times how articulate I am. A compliment. I'm 66 years old, and I've worked with people with PhDs to those who didn't finish high school. And I have never heard a white person point out to another white person how articulate they are. So I translate this compliment when it is given as, you don't sound like my presupposed idea of a Black person. We are all familiar with the terms blacklist, black male, black ball, black sheep, and even black ice. All negative ideas of Blackness embedded in our society. Black ice bothers me the most because clear ice seems more dangerous to me. If the ice were actually black, it would be easy to see and avoid. Ironically, financially, when you're in the black, you're doing well. But being in the red is not good. Issues of negative racial images are so ingrained in our culture, it can be a lot to unpack. With that in mind, we asked the Albany UU Congregation to share their stories in hopes that we can have healthy conversations about race, diversity, and inclusion. I'm grateful to all of you who contributed. I apologize that I needed to edit some of those stories, but I found them all very compelling. I also apologize because today's service is going to be about 10 minutes longer than usual. But these stories need to be heard. This is Annie Lipinski's story. I live in a small townhouse development with 70 houses and am currently the president of our neighborhood association. A few years ago, someone in the neighborhood was complaining that a particular homeowner was not maintaining their outside property as expected for the neighborhood. The family had not been in the neighborhood very long, and I wanted to make them feel welcome. I rang the doorbell, and the husband answered. I asked if he had any time to discuss the maintenance of his outdoor lawn area. He said yes. I showed him where weeds needed to be pulled and did some of the pulling that day. I also explained what he needed to do to maintain his lawn. I offered to come back and help him with the work. The next day, this man was outside for hours and filled 4 lawn bags with weeds and other yard debris. I was touched and made a point to let him know how great things looked. The man and his family are from India. We have since developed a lovely connection. He asked if I could call his neighbor to see if they could split the cost of some work that was going to be done on both of their properties. I did call her, and the situation worked out really well for both of them. His family adopted a dog. His dog and mine have become fast friends. I have since spoken many times with his wife and teenage daughter, and am so happy for the connection we have made. Once I mentioned I was going away for the day, and they offered to watch my dog. This mutuality of our connection is just lovely. And I'm hoping to get some recipes from them because the aromas coming out of their house are wonderful. Carly Stetson shared this story. I am from an agricultural community in upstate New York. We rode the school bus to and from school. Our route picked up kids who lived in what was known as the colony labor camp. They all sat at the back of the bus. About my junior year, I voluntarily joined the kids in the back for the 10-minute ride to school because they were nicer about sharing and remarkably friendly for that early in the morning. The farmer who owned the property either used the families to harvest his crops or shared them with other farmers. And although the county labor force was described as migrant laborers, it was in fact mostly stable, multi-generational community. Although our school was never explicitly segregated, the kids from the camp were placed in classes described as special. In 1970, the VISTA program came to the county. They conducted a survey of the residents of the colony labor camp and learned that most residents had rented units there for 35 years or more. The study results were publicized, and I was shocked, as I suppose were many others. Eventually, the VISTA workers convinced Mr. Colony to sell the property to the residents, and using federal funds, they repaired the units to create a modern apartment complex. The VISTA workers came into the county and exposed some ugly truths. The combination of racism and classism tolerated substandard housing and limited educational advancement. I never noticed that I had pigeonholed the kids at the back of the bus. And truthfully, that understanding of the way it is requires my vigilant awareness and hopefully resistance to this day. The killing of Trayvon Martin on February 26, 2012 was a wake-up call for us. We had been aware of other shootings of unarmed Blacks, but this one was so flagrant that we were compelled to do more. We attended the demonstrations in the South End and were moved by the presentations. Shortly after that, Barb picked up a pen at the Albany UU social justice table during coffee hour that was sponsored by the YWCA and said, "Racism hurts everyone. End racism, empower women." Barb put it on her jacket and wore it everywhere she went. Then Donald Trump got elected in 2016. Shortly after the election, Barbara was wearing her button when she had an emotional encounter with a young Black woman who thanked Barb for wearing the button. A week later, Barb had another encounter with a young man in a retail store who was checking out her purchases. He also commented on the button and thanked her for wearing it. When Barb came home from that encounter, she and I discussed her experience and decided we should do more than just wear the button. Why not get more buttons to pass out? The Y didn't have any available, so I went online and found a place where we could order them. We changed the message to just racism hurts everyone. The question was how many to order. We talked about it and decided to order 500. Would we ever be able to give out that many buttons? In fact, we did and ordered 500 more. We have had many positive experiences handing out buttons to people of color, as well as white folks. We have given them out during our various trips, so the buttons are in many different places across the US. At the same time, we have thought about what the message means. Racism hurts everyone. Clearly, racism has a much greater impact on people of color than it does on old white folks like us. Even among Blacks, the impact of racism varies greatly. We read The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson and Lanterns by Marian Wright Edelman. Both books describe the challenges faced by Black Americans and the resilience that has met those challenges. An advantage of the Racism Hurts Everyone button is that it opens up a conversation with white people who claim not to be racist. The book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone by Heather McGhee gives numerous examples of how racism hurts everyone. Communities closed public swimming pools rather than integrate them. The viability of inner cities was impacted because of redlining. Family assistance programs that benefit more whites than Blacks were cut because of racism. Union organizing efforts were hampered by racism. For us as citizens of the United States, racism is a serious problem that hurts everyone because it contradicts the ideals of the ideals that are the foundation of our country. We will continue to pass out our buttons until they are all gone, and then we will probably order 500 more. They're thinking of changing the slogan now to Stand Against Racism. Chuck and Barbara Manning. And there are buttons out in the lobby for you to take and wear. The Olay moment. Late last year, our congregation faced a controversy that involved the gratuitous use of race. We took some steps to deal with it and effect racial healing. Some of you may recall how two of our members explained the oops and the ouch. The oops being the embarrassment of the person who made the racial remark, and the ouch being the pain felt by those feeling hurt by such remarks. Today, I want to talk about the third kind of sentiment to go with the oops and the ouch feelings that were felt. As a former Catholic, I still tend to frame things in trilogies. The other feeling I want to express about this incident is what I call the Olay moment. As many of you know, Olay is an exclamation of approval typically heard at international sporting events like soccer games, when the crowd witnesses a great play. I felt this kind of sensation at the end of the service after the racial comment was made. I was sitting up in the balcony at the time after hearing the comment. I sat there processing it, my reactions ranging from surprise to confusion to annoyance. Some moments later, I saw someone walking up to the stage. When they stepped up to the microphone, they turned and faced the congregation and said that it is important to refrain from using race in public comments in ways that reinforce negative racial stereotypes. That simple, succinct comment, advocating mindfulness, showed me that someone here at that moment was moved to express that racial healing is important. I want to give a shout out to Anne-Marie Haber for stepping up and striving for racial healing. And I want to thank those of you who do what you can to achieve racial healing and equality. Some of you have done that in this space, at school, work, or in your neighborhoods. I want to emphasize this aspect of racial healing because it demonstrates love in action, in real time, and is positive. Luis Torres. Joyce Tacone wrote this. I was born in 1960 and grew up in an all-white suburban neighborhood in northern Indiana. I did not see signs of overt racism where I lived. We were taught to revere Abraham Lincoln and abhor slavery. Nevertheless, we were racist. We just didn't admit it. We were quieter about it. There were parts of town that we avoided because we didn't feel comfortable. While watching reports about the civil rights movement on television, I recall my father saying something like, I don't have a problem with Black people except for the ones that stir up trouble, the ones who don't know their place. Saddest of all, racism prevented me from getting to know members of my own family. When I was around 3 or 4, my father's sister married a Black man and moved to Detroit. I don't know much about their lives together except that they had 3 children. My only memories of my aunt were seeing her high school picture hanging on the wall in my grandparents' bedroom and being introduced to her at my grandfather's funeral. I will never get to meet my uncle or one of my cousins. They passed long ago. One of my 2 cousins who survive, I've only met one, briefly at my father's funeral. I left my hometown over 40 years ago. Meanwhile, I have a lot of white family members that still live in all-white suburban neighborhoods in the Midwest. They still vehemently deny that they are racist. They complain about affirmative action and have zero understanding of the phrase white privilege. They have faced many challenges in life. They say, how could they be privileged? How do I get my relatives to pay attention to stories of people who are different from them? How do I convince them that white privilege doesn't necessarily mean that their lives have been easy? It just means that their race has not been something to make their lives harder. Jan McCracken writes, my personal needle has moved from being unconsciously comfortable with the racism that lies within my mind and body. I am consciously uncomfortable. I recognize that the biases and conditioning within me are far deeper than my white skin. What more do I still need to learn and know? How do my senses and values work rather than collide with my unearned white privilege? I received messages to respect all people without prejudice from the start of my life, mostly from my family and UU Church. According to my mom, we were brought to the inner city Y for swim and craft lessons so that we could mingle with Black kids. My father was a director for the Albany Boys Club and Camp Thatcher. His job was explained as helping underprivileged boys. The term underprivileged was their key identity in my condensed understanding. I felt I was other than that category. When I learned about slavery in high school and institutional racism as a young adult, the lessons did not include any references to my white privilege. The daunting reality of how molded and shaped I have been by white supremacy hit me later in life, in my 50s. It was then I felt the pain, despair, anger about my participation in an educational and social system, and to some extent a family system, held together with threads of racism. May learning and love keep the doors of hope open, for that is the heart space we can enter together. Ode to L is from Pam Collins. You came to Cobleskill in the early 90s like a breath of fresh air. You were shy at first, reluctant, but I persisted, and gradually we saw the work we could do as colleagues. Together, we did what we could to help our students understand each other. White kids from farms, Black kids from the city. Their experiences worlds apart, but thrown together in this cow college in rural New York. We were together so often on campus, our students started to confuse our names. Our experiences were worlds apart as well, but you brought me into yours, showed me my white privilege, turned me on to ideas and history my white world knew nothing about, even shared some of your code words over which we giggled in our faculty meetings. You befriended my daughter and opened her world and her heart. I did my best through the years to teach her well, but with you, she lived it. You turned her name Jenny into Jenna, a more grown-up, womanly version of herself she goes by to this day. She called you her second mom, and I was glad to share the space in her heart. Then came the day you invited me on a trip to Washington, D.C., Chocolate City, you called it, your city. We had lunch with 3 of your friends. I was tolerated, but only barely. I sat quietly and listened. Talk went deep. You began talking about sons. My thoughts went to my own teenage son and my heart swelled. How do we keep them safe was the question that began the conversation. We're damned no matter what we do was the next comment. If we raise them to be strong and self-confident, they will be in jail before they're out of high school. But if we teach them to be subservient, damn it. It might keep them safe, but it denies them their selfhood. For all you had taught me about the abhorrent effects of white privilege, nothing hit me as hard as this. I worried about my son, of course I did. I felt you beside me, wanted to hug you, wanted to fix something I knew was bigger than both of us. White supremacy is a soul crusher. You eventually left Cobleskill to go somewhere where you could be more not relegated to teaching Black literature or directing the Equal Opportunity Program. I was happy for you. It took a big chunk out of me when you left, but the lessons and the friendship stayed right here in my heart. Sigrun Newell writes, and I love the title of this one, Dr. Beverly Copper Butler, brave woman. I was a professor at Walden University, an online institution for mid-career adults. Beverly Copper Butler was one of my students. She was an African-American school teacher from near Philadelphia, working on her PhD. Somewhere in the middle of her initial coursework, she phoned me. I'm sorry I'm late. I can't make my fingers work on the keyboard. I'm trying, but all of a sudden, I just can't type. Bev was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Despite the shock, she decided she was going to continue anyway. With help from her family, she completed all her coursework. We planned Bev's PhD dissertation study so she could interview parents of the school where she taught. This was possible because she could still talk, listen, and think. Her mother went along with her. They recorded the interviews while the mother typed everything. Bev analyzed the interviews, telling her sister what to write. Between the 3 of them, her dissertation was completed. By then, she was bedridden and could scarcely talk. Walden University paid for the 3 faculty members who had worked with her to fly. They paid the faculty members who worked with her to fly them there to have a hooding ceremony in her bedroom. Afterwards, her mother, family, and church members, who had all been helpful throughout Bev's PhD journey, put on a big party. The local newspaper printed a photo of Bev in bed with the PhD gown and mortarboard spread over her and we 3 faculty standing beside her. Bev lived on for another 3 or 4 years. Why Keith Ballou? Why was Keith Ballou of Albany, New York, shot to death on New Year's Day in 1975? Why was an unarmed 17-year-old Black youth killed by a super-armed state trooper? Why was a gun even used on a man running away from a suspected stolen automobile? Why was his bleeding body left for hours in the snow along the roadway? Shot in the back, dead. No call to a lawyer, no day in court, no trial by jury. America kills countless numbers of its poor young. It kills them in infancy through hunger and lack of health care. And if their bodies survive the poverty and racism of their youth, America will kill them in spirit, day by day. It will destroy their minds in maddening frustration. We who live in this society have helped to kill Keith Ballou on New Year's Day. We have not prevented him from men like State Police Lieutenant J.F. Taylor, who shot him in the back. At 16, Keith was put by Albany County Jail officials in a box. Keith and the others were in these boxes for days under illegal punishment because the Albany jail officials had been told on 2 previous occasions not to use the boxes. What can we do now for your brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters, who face the same racial society? We can find out what our tax money has bought in weaponry for law enforcement bodies. If you are concerned about the killing of Keith Ballou, we need you. That essay was written in 1975 by the late Fred Schroeder, Jan McCracken's dad. Racial Healing by Karen Strong. On the same day George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020, a white woman in Central Park called the police when a Black birdwatcher, Christian Cooper, asked her to follow the law and leash her dog. She told the police she felt her life was in danger, even though a video showed it was not. Fortunately, the incident ended before police arrived. That day, I realized that is what I look like to Black folks. No matter how good I think I am on the inside, no matter how kind I think I might be, I am a white woman who can weaponize the police by playing the victim. I grew up in upstate New York, and I remember feeling smug in elementary school when I learned about slavery, the Civil War, and Jim Crow. That's because I was clueless about segregation in the North and though I was proud of my Union Army veteran ancestors, I didn't know that I had Confederate veteran ancestors. In 2012, I heard Richard Rothstein, author of The Color of Law, on Fresh Air talk about what segregation looked like in the North. For the first time, I learned about redlining and just how hard white folks work to uphold white supremacy. I started to understand what systematic racism meant and paid much closer attention to my privileges. I shared what I learned with other white folks. A few years later, overconfident in my wokeness, I was at a watershed conference and a white woman presented bluntly about racism in the environmental movement. The room full of older white advocates was stunned, but I was excited. At the break, I ran right up to the speaker and asked how I could start doing anti-racist work in the environmental space too. And she said, go learn about racism in your community. Go listen to Black voices and decenter yourself. I read more books, listened to lectures and podcasts. I intentionally built relationships with Black folks in my community, and I joined the Octavia E. Butler Book Club here at UU. Probably most importantly, I learned that anti-racism is a process, not an end state. And this is from Deborah Vogel. During our Standing Against Racist vigil in Troy every Saturday, we always get reactions from people driving by as we hold our signs, Stand Against Racism and Black Lives Matter. Motorists often offer a thumbs up or a honking horn, sometimes a thank you or a wave. Sometimes there's a white person who yells, "All lives matter," or displays a hostile finger gesture. We're used to all of it. But occasionally, someone will stop by our group to speak with us. One Saturday last year, a young woman walked up to us and said, "Thank you for seeing me." She started to cry. I walked over and hugged her. She hugged me back. It was just a moment, but I will never forget it or what she said. Navigating race in America. My interaction with the topics of race and racism has varied dramatically over my lifetime, due in large part to the fact that I spent the first half of my childhood living in the American South, the epicenter of American racism. The second half of my childhood was living outside the US, which not only removed me from having to deal with US-style racism, but also put me into a situation where, while far from being underprivileged, I did experience, as do many in the BIPOC community, living as a minority in a dominant culture not my own. My parents, devout white liberals, were strong opponents of the segregation that surrounded them. In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where my father grew up, my parents were active campaigners against Jim Crow. They walked in picket lines outside of segregated stores and barbershops. Dad often carried me on his shoulders. My parents were friends with an African-American family, the Blues, with whom we often went camping in the Great Smoky Mountains. The Blues had two sons around my age with whom I can remember playing. Despite these experiences, I can remember being confused about race and what it meant. In my integrated second grade class, I became friends with a Black boy named Eric. He was the only student in the class who could run faster than I, which to a second grader, of course, is friendship gold. We developed a ritual twice a week of stopping by my house after classes for a Coke. But the boy I considered my best friend at the time was a white boy named Tim, the son of our landlady. Tim had the advantage of having a color TV and no limit on the amount of time he could watch it. My folks limited my brother and I to 1 hour of TV per day. Tim, on the other hand, got to watch cartoons all Saturday morning. As sweet as the whole Green family was to me, they made no bones about their racism. My 8-year-old brain filled up with such bromides as the darkies had better stay in their place, and with Tim teaching his dog, Blackie, to sick 'em. I knew this was wrong, but not wrong enough apparently to outweigh the Saturday morning lineup that included Birdman, Spider-Man, and the Fantastic Four in living color. I cannot imagine that my picket line walking parents were ignorant of their landlady's view on race. Some parents might have dealt with the problem by forbidding their child to hang out with Tim. My parents had their own unique approach. We moved to Istanbul, Turkey. Our time in Turkey offered a respite from the issue of race in America. When out in public in Istanbul, I remember feeling a strong desire not to stand out. I returned to the US for prep school and college. My mindset at the time was that we were not really Americans, so American racism was not really my problem. I continued for many years of my adult life to think of myself as one of the good white people, and certainly not a racist. Hadn't I been on picket lines protesting segregation, been camping with a Black family as a child, and invited a Black classmate to my house on a biweekly basis, Surely I was the white incarnation of Martin Luther King Jr. Then my father, who preceded me in Unitarian Universalism, began talking to me about white privilege and institutional racism. One can be the kindest person in the world and not see race and still benefit from the fact that one's skin is lily pale. The US we live in today has changed dramatically from the one in which I was born. Perhaps there is hope in that thought. And that was from Michael Crowell, who I will let you know today is one of my brothers from another mother. I was born on February 18th, 1958 at St. John's Episcopal Hospital in Brooklyn, New York at 5:45 a.m. I was 6 when my mother showed me my birth certificate. My dad, a very dark-skinned man, was listed as Negro. My mother, a very light-skinned woman, was listed as colored. I was listed as Black. My grandfather, Cubie Lee Moore, was born in 1863 or 4, we're not sure. He was born into slavery. He was 65 or 66 when my father was born. My adopted son, African American, adopted the white daughter of the woman he loves before they got married. America and Albany UU are moving in the right direction. However, this is work that is perpetual, and I think we are up for the challenge. May it be so. Asante Sana. Amen. And now, let's take a moment of silent meditation. As a meditation in words, I'm going to give you this story. Why does everyone keep telling me I'm angry? I'll never forget the mix of confusion, hurt, and yes, anger in her eyes as she snapped at me. She was a young mother in her mid-20s. She was a participant in the job preparation program I was managing, working with recipients of temporary aid for needy families, what most people refer to as welfare. She had been searching for a job for a while. She was smart and driven. She was fiercely independent and did not like needing the government's help to put food on the table or a roof over her head. Yet, her job search had not panned out. I was critiquing her interview skills, giving her feedback on her answers, her appearance, etc., the kind of things that potential employers would evaluate. After praising her resume, her choice of interview outfit, even how she deftly explained what skills she had to offer, the criticism I offered was like, maybe you come across as angry? I clearly was not the first person to tell her this. The thing is, she had had lots of reasons to be angry. She was a young Black woman living in an urban environment rife with violence and drugs. She dodged daily assaults physically, socially, psychologically, economically. Being a single mother, she had to do the best she could to shield her child from those assaults as well. Anger was her armor to function in a dysfunctional world. The paradox that comes with the trauma of racism, you have to develop coping mechanisms, but those coping mechanisms then become the focus of why you are unacceptable. You learn to steel yourself against the daily affronts of racism. You're an angry Black woman. Doors of opportunity are continually slammed in your face, so you stop knocking on them. You're lazy. You work hard and do your best to fit in to dominant culture. You're uppity. The dominant culture insists that Black women smile through their pain. It isn't fair, but it is real. My job was to help her keep her armor, but wear it in a way that it wouldn't be an obstacle. Ultimately, she succeeded. She landed a job that she liked. What she heard from me was that she could choose how to project herself. She had more control over the light in which she was cast than she had been aware of. Seeing ourselves in a different light can be very empowering. I hope this story will be a reminder to be cognizant of the light we cast on others, of the roles we expect them to play to fulfill our expectations. We can empower or disempower others by the light we cast. Jay Holly. Race is a social construct created by wealthy white people to give a pseudo-scientific justification for the enslavement, colonization, or genocide of non-white peoples for centuries. As such, it has been the single most influential aspect of my life. My race, as determined by the American caste system, has negatively affected my family's ability to provide intergenerational wealth for its children. It has negatively affected the mental health of my family, with prior generations suffering alcoholism, anxiety, and depression. The caste system into which I was born has always rewarded a fortunate few with a relative amount of success, at the same time that it throws barrier after barrier before the vast majority of people of color. All the while exhorting us to just work harder, be heroic, and play by the ever-changing rules. Everything I just said is the truth. Time after time, I have spoken the truth of my life to white people. I have never expected anyone to automatically agree with me, though I am pleased when such a thing occurs. What truly perplexes me is the anger that I often encounter, as if the very act of my speaking about racism is somehow unbearable to them. Worse, I am often accused of lying, as if I so desperately needed to convince them of the existence of systemic racism. Their anger often is an attempt to make me stop telling the truth. Just shut up. The next time you find yourself getting angry at a person of color when they are relating facts about race, try to sit with those feelings for a moment. Turn inward and try to see where your feelings come from. Anger is a legitimate response when the speaker is being insulting, whether to another group or to you personally. However, absent the speaker's obnoxious behavior or offensive language, please think for a moment about possible triggers before responding in anger. Peace always begins with empathy and compassion. Michael Hornsby.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words printed in your bulletin. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And I think we have Dick Dana coming down to do our coffee hour connection. Coffee Hour is brought to you today by the Growth Through Service team. We decided to go traditional today, so enjoy the bagels and cream cheese. What is Growth Through Service? Some of you I know are no doubt asking. Our Growth Through Service conversation leaders are closing in on having a conversation with every member of our congregation with the goal of helping our members tap into what connects them to Albany UU. We want to learn about you so that we can help you connect in ways that mean the most to you. Whether that connection might be the philosophy group or a book group, or maybe you just want to attend the services and chat with your friends in coffee hour. Whatever the reasons are that bring you here each week, we want to know. And for those of you who are already connected, well connected to Albany UU, in our conversation, we want to explore whether you are happy with your relationship to our community and whether you might want to explore other opportunities for connection. If you haven't yet had a conversation with one of our conversation leaders, please see me and I'll set you up with one. Lately, we have lost quite a few of our conversation leaders to positions of higher responsibility, namely the Board of Trustees. So we are looking to recruit new conversation leaders. I know most of you out there have had a Growth Through Service conversation, so you know what it's like to have a conversation leader meet with you. If you might have an interest in turning the tables, so to speak, and becoming a conversation leader yourself, or if you're just curious about what it might be like, come talk to me, or give me a call, or text me. Thank you. I have two additional printed announcements to read. First, regarding the nominating committee. The nominating committee is very busy drawing up a slate of candidates for the election to be held at the annual meeting on May 19th. We are mindful that the next 2 years will be transition years for the society as we need talented leaders to navigate the challenges that this brings. There are meaningful rewards for those who help lead the congregation to a brighter future, and the committee would appreciate a little help. If you would like to be nominated for any position, or you have a friend who might like to serve, please let the committee know. You could contact Kathy Hodges or Nelson Jacobs Moore, John Newell, Kelly Smith, or the chair, Reese Satin. And also, concerning next Sunday, February 25th, come meet the social justice team. After service in the community hall, the Congregational Life team invites newcomers and old-timers alike who would like to know more about Albany UU's social justice team and their work to attend this new monthly mini coffee hour in the back of the community hall. This will be a smaller and somewhat quieter coffee hour that will provide an alternate, but not a replacement, for the coffee hour in Channing Hall. So join us immediately following services at the back of hall next week, February 25th, for conversation and refreshments. Let's hope that, of course, if everybody decides they want a quiet coffee hour, then it won't be very quiet. But let's see what happens. Finally, we might have guests and visitors today. If so, we'd like to get to know you. If you'd like to tell us who you are and where you're from, those here in Community Hall are invited to stand or raise your hand. The usher will bring you the microphone so that everyone can hear you. Or those on Zoom can click on the raise hand symbol. Our technician will then invite you to unmute and introduce yourself. Anyone here? I guess not. Anyone on Zoom?
There's no one on Zoom.
All right then, well. Well, thank you, and welcome to all who have joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation, you can stop by the table in the lobby and speak with our welcome table host, who is Elizabeth Berberian today. Those on Zoom can reach out through the chat window. There will also be a chance to socialize and welcome newcomers after the service. Those on Zoom are encouraged to join a breakout room for conversation and fellowship. You can click to accept the room assignment when it appears on your screen. Those in Community Hall are invited to attend the coffee hour in Channing Hall. We especially encourage any guests and visitors to stay with us for coffee and refreshments. We're glad you joined us today. I believe this concludes our service. Thank you.
Bring them into Channing Hall and we will post them on the board. Oh, I'm sorry, did I not? Oh my goodness. Okay. I didn't explain what to do with them. I am so sorry. This service, putting it together and conducting it, has probably been one of the hardest things I've ever done. This was hard. But it was worth it in that it was lovely to hear so many wonderful stories from so many people that I had no idea who you were before. And now I know you very well. And Sigrid, I'm sorry I couldn't make it through your story without breaking down. I tried several times, but that story gets to me every time. The cards. Okay, there is a project that's been going around the nation. 6 words about racism. Only 6 words. That's all you're allowed to put on the card. 6 words about racism. So that's what I want you to do with those cards. 6 words, racism. They're going to go onto the board in Channing Hall. It is a study that has been conducted by a Black professor from a college, and it has been eye-opening. When you confine people to 6 words, what they will say is fascinating. So I'm curious as to how we can react to those 6 words. Racism. It took me 2 days. I won't lie to you. It was either 4 words, 7 words. I'm thinking, what's 6 words? What I came up with is, I'm Black. My partner is white.